The road stretched ahead, dimly lit and slick from an earlier rain, the pavement reflecting streetlights like fading stars. It was one of those quiet, southern nights, still thick with humidity, the kind that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Traffic was sparse, just the occasional car easing by, tires hissing softly against the wet asphalt. Somewhere outside, Montgomery, Alabama, silence ruled the highway. Behind the wheel of a dark gray sedan, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Fields adjusted her grip, her fingers drumming lightly along the leather steering wheel. A faint jazz track flowed from the speakers. Coltrane, if she wasn't mistaken, smooth, calming, familiar. She wasn't in uniform tonight. No medals, no insignia, nothing to mark her status. Just jeans, a black hoodie, and her hair pulled back into a low, neat twist. She looked like anyone else. That was the idea. She had been driving for a little over 2 hours, making her way back from a visit to her godmother's house. A surprise stop after a grueling week of military meetings and personnel reviews. Her eyes flicked to the dashboard. 11:42 p.m. Almost home. She was already picturing the warm shower, the cold drink, the quiet bed. Then came the lights, red and blue, flashing in her rearview mirror like a sudden storm. No siren, just the aggressive blink of authority racing up behind her. Her stomach tensed, not with fear, but with weary anticipation. She knew this dance. She had rehearsed it 100 times in her head. Every black person she knew had. With calm precision, Naomi signaled, pulled onto the shoulder, and parked. She took a slow breath and kept both hands on the wheel, perfectly still. Her military training didn't just prepare her for war zones overseas, it prepared her for moments exactly like this one. Behind her, the patrol car came to a halt. It lingered a moment before the door opened and the officer stepped out. His movements were deliberate, entitled, like a man convinced the world owed him obedience. Heavy boots hit the wet ground with slow, calculated thuds. His flashlight flicked on, slicing through the darkness and settling on her side mirror. Naomi watched him approach, her posture relaxed but alert. As he drew closer, the name on his badge caught the light. Sergeant Blake Monroe, license and registration. He barked. No hello, no explanation. She reached slowly for her glove compartment, every motion precise, intentional. Of course, officer, she said, handing over the documents. Monroe took them with barely a glance, his eyes scanning her car, then her face. Taillights out, he muttered. Naomi frowned slightly. That's strange. I had it serviced 2 weeks ago. His eyes narrowed. You calling me a liar? The air shifted. A familiar tension crept in. The moment when power demands submission. She'd seen it before, in war rooms and briefings, in interrogation tents and command disputes. She knew what was happening, and she wasn't new to it. No, she replied calmly. I'm saying I'd be happy to check it out. If there's a problem, I'll get it fixed. Monroe's smirk returned. Step out of the vehicle. Naomi didn't move immediately. Can I ask why? His jaw tightened. Because I said so. She sighed inwardly, but didn't argue. With deliberate care, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. The night air met her with a damp chill. She stood still, letting her presence do the talking. Measured. Controlled. Turn around, Monroe ordered. Hands on the car. For what reason? She asked, her voice even. You resisting now? He snapped, stepping closer. Number, I'm asking a lawful question. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his radio. Dispatch, got a non-compliant subject. Naomi's heartbeat remained steady. Officer Monroe, she said firmly, I need you to understand something. I know exactly what my rights are, and I know exactly what you can't do. That did it. His eyes flared. You're under arrest. For what? Obstructing an officer? She blinked slowly. So that was the play. He lunged for her wrist, but she moved just enough to avoid him. She didn't run, didn't fight. Instead, she raised her hands calmly. I'm not resisting. Hands on the car, now. Naomi hesitated for half a breath, then did as instructed. She felt the cold metal beneath her palms. A moment later, Monroe yanked her arms behind her back, slapping on the cuffs tight, too tight. She winced. "You don't know who you're messing with," she murmured. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm messing with," Monroe sneered. He shoved her toward his patrol car, but he didn't, not even close. Inside the patrol car, Naomi sat upright, her hands cuffed tightly behind her back. Her wrists throbbed with the burn of friction, but she kept her breathing slow and deliberate. The cruiser smelled of stale coffee and worn leather, and the radio on the dash crackled with occasional static, the dispatcher's voice faint but steady. Sergeant Monroe hadn't said a word since slamming the door shut. He stood outside, pacing, speaking into his shoulder mic in hushed tones. From the side mirror, Naomi watched his posture, agitated, uncertain. Not the confident strut of earlier. He was realizing something, slowly. Maybe it was the name on her ID. Maybe it was the calm she carried, even in cuffs. Maybe it was something deeper. He walked back over and opened the front door of the cruiser, not the rear where she was seated. "You military?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. "Yes," she replied flatly. "What branch?" "U.S. Navy. Lieutenant Commander Naomi Fields." His jaw tightened. That rank didn't just carry weight, it carried consequences. Monroe looked away, like the words had hit him in the chest. "You should have said that up front," he muttered. Naomi turned her head, eyes sharp. "I didn't know it was relevant to a broken tail light." For a moment, they just stared at each other, two opposing forces in the stillness of the night, but only one of them had law on their side. "I'm calling this in," he said finally, then slammed the door shut again. Naomi leaned back into the seat, the pressure on her shoulders sharp. But her mind wasn't on the pain, it was calculating, remembering everything about the stop, his tone, his words, the pressure of the cuffs. She didn't let it shake her. She had faced armed militants in foreign countries. She'd de-escalated hostage situations. She wasn't going to be broken by a patrolman with a badge and a bruised ego. Another squad car pulled up behind them minutes later, lights washing the road in blinding color. Out stepped a female officer, blonde, mid-40s, with a professional gait and a curious expression. Naomi couldn't hear what was being said, but she watched Monroe's gestures, the stutter in his hands, the way he pointed toward the cruiser like the problem was hers and not his. Soon, the woman approached the passenger window and tapped gently. "Lieutenant Commander Fields?" she asked through the glass. Naomi nodded once. "I'm Sergeant Dana Reese. Would you be willing to step out and speak with me?" "I'm cuffed." Her brows lifted slightly. "Let me take care of that." The back door opened, and Reese helped Naomi out with the kind of care Monroe never gave. As she unlocked the cuffs, Reese whispered, "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." Naomi rubbed her wrists, the raw lines already forming. "I'm filing a formal complaint." Reese nodded, "and I'll back it." They moved to the side of the road, Monroe still lingering near his car, arms crossed like a child sent to time out. He didn't make eye contact. "What exactly happened?" Reese asked, pen in hand. Naomi recounted the stop from start to finish. Calm, precise, no exaggeration, just facts. His tone, his orders, the unlawful search attempt, the cuffs. Reese's expression grew darker with every word. When Naomi finished, she added, "I've got a dash cam, front and rear." Reese looked up, eyebrows raised. "You're recording?" Naomi gave a tight nod. "Always." A long silence passed, then Reese sighed, looking toward Monroe with quiet disappointment. "He's been a problem before," she said under her breath. "Not enough to stick, but enough to know." Naomi folded her arms. "That ends tonight." And it did. The footage from Naomi's dash cam made its rounds before dawn. It didn't need a caption, just the video of a black woman calmly following instructions and a white officer escalating a situation from zero to excessive in seconds. It didn't take long for it to land on the desk of the precinct's internal affairs unit. By mid-morning, Naomi stood in a civilian conference room across from the police chief, a couple of city attorneys, and Monroe himself. noticeably paler, no badge in sight. The chief had the look of a man cleaning up a spill someone else made. "Lieutenant Commander Fields," he said, clearing his throat, "let me begin by saying we take these allegations very seriously." Naomi raised a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Number, you don't get to start there." The room quieted. "You start with an apology," she said, voice calm as ever. "Not a statement, not a legal shield, just an honest admission that one of your officers abused his authority, humiliated a decorated officer of the United States military, and violated every principle of due process." Monroe shifted in his seat, but Naomi never looked at him. "You owe that to me," she finished, "but more importantly, you owe that to the community he's supposed to serve." There was a beat of silence. Then the chief leaned forward. "You're right," he said. "It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't perfect. But it was a start. Monroe was placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation. But the video had already gone viral. News anchors debated it. Community leaders rallied around it. And Naomi, despite her initial hesitation, agreed to speak on a national morning show. She didn't do it for attention. She did it so the next woman in her shoes would know that silence wasn't the only option, that there is power in standing firm, that calm is not weakness, that dignity doesn't shrink under pressure, it rises. Despite the public apology and Monroe's suspension, Naomi knew this was far from over. These kinds of incidents had a way of getting swept under the rug once the public moved on. She had no intention of letting that happen. 2 weeks after the stop, she stood at the front of a packed auditorium at a community town hall. Cameras lined the back wall, and folding chairs were filled with local residents, reporters, veterans, activists, and a few scattered officers in uniform. Naomi took a breath before speaking into the microphone. "I didn't expect to be here. I didn't expect to be trending online. I didn't want that." She looked out at the crowd. Some nodded, others leaned forward. "I wanted to get home from work. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to go on with my life, like every other night before. But that night, Officer Monroe decided I didn't deserve that simple dignity. He decided a tail light gave him permission to put his hands on me, to interrogate me, to cuff me like a criminal." Her voice didn't tremble, it grew firmer. "And I'm one of the lucky ones. I had training, I had composure, I had a camera, and still, he tried to break me." Murmurs filled the room. Cameras zoomed in. "This isn't about one bad cop," Naomi continued. "It's about a system that protects him. It's about how many women, how many black women, don't get heard, don't get believed, don't get justice." The applause came slowly at first, then thundered as people stood to their feet. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't come for applause. She came for action. In the weeks that followed, Naomi became a force the department hadn't expected. She filed a formal civil rights complaint through the DOJ and met with local lawmakers behind closed doors. Her story had touched a nerve, not just in the city, but across the state. An internal review uncovered previous complaints against Monroe that had been quietly dismissed. He had a pattern. Stops like Naomi's that didn't make the news because the victims didn't wear uniforms or carry rank. With pressure mounting, the district attorney opened a formal inquiry. Monroe was officially charged with unlawful arrest and misconduct under color of law. At the arraignment, Naomi sat in the front row in uniform, not out of ego, but as a reminder. She wasn't going away. Monroe's attorney tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment, temporary stress. But the footage, the pattern, and Naomi's composure under fire made the defense crumble before it even began. The case would go to trial, and Naomi. She prepared not just as a witness, but as a leader. The courtroom was tense. Every seat filled. Cameras banned, but reporters everywhere. Naomi took the stand on the second day. She described the night again, this time under oath. Her words were deliberate, measured, truth layered with experience. "Yes, I was calm," she said, eyes on the jury, "because I was trained to be. That didn't make what he did right. That didn't mean I wasn't afraid. That didn't mean it didn't hurt." She looked over at Monroe. His face was blank. I stayed calm because I've seen men like him lose control in situations like this. I didn't want to become a headline. I just wanted to go home. Cross-examination came, but Naomi didn't flinch. She answered every question without a trace of anger. The prosecutor played the footage for the court, let the silence between Monroe's shouts speak for itself. It was over before the defense realized it had begun, for the jury returned a verdict in less than 3 hours. Guilty. Monroe was sentenced to 14 months and stripped of his badge. The city announced a new civilian oversight board within the department, partially named in Naomi's honor. But she wasn't done. Naomi started a foundation, Project Sentinel, dedicated to training citizens in their rights during police encounters and providing veterans legal representation when they experience misconduct. She was invited to speak at colleges, on panels, and even at the Pentagon. But she never lost sight of why she started. Every speech, every interview, every meeting with lawmakers started the same way. Before I wore this uniform, I was still human. That's all I ever wanted to be treated as. She returned to her base after a long tour of advocacy, saluted at the gate, and walked into her quarters. A plaque waited for her on the wall, gifted by her fellow officers. It read, "Strength is not in the badge or the uniform, but in the calm of knowing your worth." Naomi smiled. Finally, she allowed herself that. And when she closed her eyes that night, there was no blue and red flashing in her memory, just peace.